Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. This podcast is for those who are living with the effects of prenatal exposure to alcohol, their loved ones, and anyone else wanting to learn more about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Each week, you'll hear from someone whose expertise is either professional or living experience with FASD. I'm your host, Patti Kasper, bringing you both. Now let's get started with another candid conversation. So Gilbert, welcome back.
Thank you, Patti.
It's been, a year, I think, since we had you on the show. Catch us up. What's going on with you?
Yeah, I think it's been nearly a year or probably a month or two, over a year since we talked last. And yeah, I think lots and lots have happened since we spoke last. I believe at the time we spoke, it was when we were about to launch the current round of research, which I am doing in company of some of the great collaboration around the world. So that's now in full gear, and I'm happy to talk about it if that will be
Please
of any interest. Right. So essentially, we are, as a group, I say we because it's a collaboration with some of the well-known names in the research area who are interested in justice system research. And we are really wanting to delve deeper to understand some of the things that we have found across the year. Of course, from parent and caregiver testimonies, we know there's been reports of encounters with the justice system. There's been reports of things like suggestibility and confabulation. And what we did find, from my PhD was, compared to those who were neurotypical, this was the case. But we did make clear, or I did make clear, I believe in the first interview and even currently as we go on, that of course not everybody with FASD encounters the justice system. I think I did make it clear that also the confabulation, the suggestibility we see is also not seen in everyone. It's a wide range. So building on that currently is wanting to really understand. And some of the things that have happened is that there's been quite a lot of engagement with police officers, with magistrates, judges, professionals within the court system to make them understand some of these things. And we make it really clear to them, as always, that the fact that research shows that a number of our young people or a number of individuals with FASD encounter the justice system, it doesn't say they are criminals. It doesn't say because they have a diagnosis of FASD, they are immediately, and their genes are then kind of modified into criminality. No, it just shows that certain issues, certain behavioral issues without the necessary support can lead to police encounters. So all those engagements have been it's been interesting to hear the reactions from the police force and all the other professionals.
Are you finding a warm reception to what you're trying to teach them?
Yes, so far so good, I would say. And so, for instance, in the UK here, we had a memorandum of understanding with the police department where we had to be trained on FASD and some of the findings from that PhD research. I've also got another memorandum of understanding from a probation office, the probation department, where I've been training them all along since the time we met last. We've commissioned the training and we started like a screening within their population to see potential cases. And I've just returned from New Zealand last week where I had engagement with the police, with forensic interviewers there, and it was the subject of FASD and how these vulnerabilities, they need to really be aware of it and ask the questions about FASD that need to be asked. So all of this now, we are putting it together in this new study to understand a bit more. I'm currently recruiting from Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Canada, the UK, and the US, where we are recruiting individuals from the age of 11 upwards we want to see the mechanism of these things, what triggers some of these things, and hopefully we can understand a bit more and then possibly go down the route of trying to develop interventions that will support our young people, support the population for those who are vulnerable in this respect, such that the trajectory into the justice system or say problems within society can be minimized. So that's the ambition, and that's what I'm currently on.
So have you found any surprises so far in the work that you've been doing?
So far, I have assessed 84 people from around the world, and what we've seen is that with suggestibility is actually, again, a real range in the sense that you find those who clearly would maintain their stand on situations or their opinions, but then we then have the range that is really vulnerable, and that seems to be quite what keeps repeating over and over, especially after a time delay, because we are measuring suggestibility, confabulation, compliance immediately, and again after 7 days. So we want to see after a time delay, how do these things interplay? How do they affect the young people or the individuals? And the idea is to understand a bit more so that we can probably start thinking of real research-based support for these.
So I think I have some working hypothesis in my mind, but where do you see
Right.
that progression? Is it a youth or a young adult or even an older adult who maybe their developmental timeline is more significantly delayed, being very vulnerable to the suggestibility of people that ill intent, kind of roping them in to be their fall guy for their criminal intent? Is there like a timeline between when someone is persuaded to engage in an activity and then when they're caught, I'm assuming being confronted with it all, especially in the manner that many policemen or detectives are used to being very aggressive in their interviewing? That certainly would get the defenses up and get the confabulation roaring. Is there an element, a predictable timeline between when they have that chain of responses with their mind catching up and saying, you know, this probably wasn't so good?
Yes, certainly there are patterns we are seeing and across age groups, even though recruitment is ongoing. And I must say, one of the things that seem a bit of a hurdle is finding sufficient number of adults from 18 upwards who've gotten a diagnosis, but certainly from 11 to 17, we've got lots and lots of recruitment in the age. And clearly, we can see what is going on in terms of that immediate suggestibility after 50 minutes and after 1 week, what is going on. And for majority of what I've seen so far with the sample we've recruited, with the families we've worked with, is that at the onset, immediately, there could be suggestibility, and there could be that vulnerability, confabulation. But after 7 days especially, we actually see that this begins to widen compared to the neurotypical group. What I mean by that is, with immediate assessment, as part of the assessment, we throw in some false suggestions to see if the individual will actually admit. After 7 days, what I've seen happen over and over again, some of those false suggestions become incorporated into the individual's account of what happened the previous week. So this is where we are hoping to take this information to educate professionals, because if on the immediate you're interviewing individuals, you are throwing out these false suggestions and trying to extract confessions by suggesting stuff to them, most likely what then may happen is down the line after time, it then, because the memory is becoming weaker, as we've seen in the research, the individual may not remember as much detail as they could remember immediately. they may possibly, take those false suggestions and incorporate them as part of the story.
That really makes tremendous sense. And I'm one of those living with FASD who's never been in trouble. So I get a lot of my ideas from shows like Law and Order.
Right.
This is all Hollywood. And I get that. But it's not far-fetched to believe that the detectives are not constrained by the mandate to be ethical and honest, because their goal is to get the confession. Although certainly there's the ethical mandate of we don't want to get just someone, but we want to get the right one through the system and convicted. But have you gotten the sense that this is where stigma comes into play?
Do you mean
and bias, like detectives having biases based on misinformation about FASD?
Yeah, certainly. And this is again a point which I really jotted down I wanted to make. What the research is showing is it's not saying that individuals with FASD are incapable of telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what it's saying. That's not what it's not saying their testimonies are always confabulated, or because essentially misinformation in this regard can then lead to adverse consequences, which we are aware of as a research community. We understand this. That is why we take the time to interpret the results very carefully, because these vulnerabilities can be taken the other way around, especially for victims and witnesses of crime. So the research is not in any way saying individuals with FASD would always confabulate and are not capable of telling the truth. What it is saying is that it is actually highlighting the potential vulnerabilities that may impact the testimonies depending on the conditions of the interview. So if you are in a situation where there's high anxiety, high interrogative pressure, which we are now saying to forensic interviewers and professionals to say, look, the conditions of the interview need to be right so our young people don't get in trouble. If you put interrogative pressure to extract confession, then essentially you are creating the perfect storm. You are creating the perfect platform for all of these vulnerabilities to be amplified. So it is not in any way saying they cannot testify correctly or tell the truth, but these are vulnerabilities that can come into play if the conditions or the type of questioning is not right. And another point which I also try to stress across the research when talking to professionals is family testimonies, caregiver testimonies should always be taken into consideration. Don't ignore these. Don't ignore these, because the only person who is expert with that young person or that child is their parents, their caregiver. Many times they know about the young person more than anyone else on the planet. So it's important to kind of take all of this into consideration during procedural actions, so to say.
And I wonder if maybe some more general education, certainly with law enforcement and with attorneys and and judges, but even in the general community, about the difference between confabulation and lying, I think plays into this. Oftentimes when people have not heard the term confabulation, and one of the first answer or responses to that is, well, it's when you catch your kid with something and you say, isn't the rule you don't touch that? What? I don't have it and it's in their hand. Parents relate to the idea of crazy lying, right? When the stories don't match the facts. But in order for something to be a lie, there has to be an intent to deceive.
Exactly so.
Which has nothing to do with confabulation. Confabulation is all about faulty memory and filling in the blanks.
That's right. You are 100% spot on that. And certainly with confabulation, there is no intention to deceive. It's a genuine belief that whatever story you are being told whoever is telling the story believes they are telling you the truth. And it's the same thing with suggestibility. When the person says yes to your suggestion, they genuinely believe they are saying yes to a suggestion. They've internalized that. They believe what you've said. They believe the suggestions you've embedded in your questions. That's why they are accepting it.
Yeah.
This is why many times in the course of the research, what I have seen is that the individual will say yes to those false suggestions, but then begin to develop imaginary stories, confabulated stories to support their false admissions. So they are not just only saying yes to the false suggestions, but then they are beginning to develop background stories to really emphasize why their answer is correct.
Yeah.
This is where self-incrimination happens, because you are not just admitting false suggestions, you are then generating all these stories, and it's different from someone who wants to lie. Someone who wants to lie has that intention to actually misrepresent the truth or falsely lead you into a path that is not reality.
Yeah. And it is normal and natural to want to avoid being in trouble. Right?
Certainly.
I mean, that's kind of universal. That's just not a fun experience.
No.
And any toddler will try and avoid being in trouble and kind of stretch the truth to avoid it.
Yeah.
But that's really not what this is.
No.
I often explain it to people that everybody confabulates if the situation is conducive to that. All of us will lose access to our memory banks if we are dysregulated, if we are anxious, if we are fearful, if we are traumatized. It's why if there's an accident and the police interview 20 different people, the stories aren't going to match, because everybody's perception is different, and a lot of them will have difficulty accessing what really did happen because they were in a trauma state.
That's right.
Where either the information was not getting into the memory correctly, or they've lost access to the communication part of their brain, which also happens in trauma and fear. But our brains don't like voids. And so we'll fill in the blank. And I remind people, before we had TiVo, before we could stop or pause or rewind TV programs, you know, we ran to the kitchen or the bathroom for our bio breaks in hopes that we'd make it back to the living room in time and not miss anything. But invariably, when we do, our mind immediately starts racing to fill in those blanks. It's something we all do, because we don't like missing things.
No.
And I think reminding people of that normalizes the process.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of literature and publications in this area that show that even in really healthy individuals who are well educated, intelligent, and smart people, when the conditions of the interview is actually very demeaning, dehumanizing, and really not conducive, you can produce confabulation at an alarming rate. I mean, as I speak to you, I think of one very specific example, which I use all the time. I think it happened in Iceland with a basketball player who, was remanded, and all of a sudden he started confabulating very actively. So all of these things, that's where education is so crucial to forensic professionals to really understand. And we do it in such a way that it doesn't victimize our young people with FASD. We do it in such a way that actually does not present them in a disadvantage. And this is where correct awareness is important.
I remember talking about this with Dr. Jared Brown at one point. I can't remember the name of the person he had suggested I look at their research, but there's this whole line of research about how reliable is memory anyway. Memory is always getting tweaked. with or without FASD, memory is always getting tweaked. I was thinking earlier while we were talking, I always question like a witness statement about, oh, and they were 190 pounds. How in the world would you know that? I don't think most people can guesstimate that with any degree of accuracy, but doesn't that risk sending people off on a wild goose chase? If
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm
Certainly.
just thinking outside the box again.
Yeah, I mean, this is, certainly thinking outside the box is what pushes society forward, certainly, because for us to make change, we must be able to go outside what the convention is to really delve deeper into issues like this. And this is why I'm quite keen about the second round of research we're trying to do. We really want to understand this because there's research available on the neurotypical population. There's research available on some other conditions, but we don't have anything at all within the FASD population that explains this. Because the basis of any support, the basis of any intervention is actually a real understanding of the issues at play. You have to understand the mechanisms, you have to understand what triggers this stuff, such that when we are taking this information to professionals, we can say, right, this is what has been understood. These environmental conditions trigger suggestibility, trigger confabulation, trigger whatever it is that we have studied. And this is what you can do to provide support to the young people to ensure there's no miscarriage of justice. It is not in any way meant to dehumanize or diminish anyone. We need to understand what's going on in order to be able to provide the information to say, look, support our young people this way.
Yeah.
This is the way. It's like when I believe in one of the cases I was invited to provide expert testimony for. One of the arguments to the judge was, well, if you are insisting on sending this young person to prison, there are no accommodations. There are no interventions that are FASD aware, and these are all of the issues that come with individuals who may have FASD. Not everybody may have them, but for this particular case, these are the vulnerabilities we've seen. In order to be able to give the best kind of support such that this person does not come out even more damaged, there has to be accommodations. You have to understand these things before. If not, then you are just then damaging the young person even more.
And
that's kind of the lens.
I was just going to say, in addition to trying to educate those in law enforcement, we really need to also be concerned with ensuring that forensic psychologists understand FASD more fully than they probably currently do, because that's who the defense lawyers and the prosecuting attorneys all point to. Well, let's get the expert. But if the experts aren't up to speed with current understanding on FASD, or if they have biases based on misinformation or myths or stigma, that's a real concern.
That's right. You are very correct. Certainly, forensic psychologists are key in providing things like testimony to courts and things. So it's crucial. We've done some, I think, 2 sessions of already forensic psychologists within the last few months, I think. And the idea is to actually, again, show what the research currently says. And the best way to understand is when they see certain presentations. Another group of people we have targeted is the probation officer. We have a group of probation officers who, I don't know about the system over there where you are, but here in the UK, we understand that we have probation officers who sit in court and provide things like, they provide input into things like pre-sentencing reports. So when someone comes to court before the sentencing, I think they contribute to the report before the sentence. So we are really looking forward to Forge because we think they are key. Because sometimes it can be missed, from the lawyers, social workers, everybody else. But at that point, if there's just that one person, whether the forensic psychologist or the probation officer who is responsible for presenters report, if there's just that one person who can say, look, I think this looks like FASD, it could be a lifesaver.
Truly. And also, if you think about probation or parole officers, their task being to shepherd someone into a more productive life. So there's not recidivism. I think it would be very beneficial for each PO to understand the particular strengths and weaknesses of each and every person under their charge.
Yeah.
Because if an individual they're working with has time blindness, gonna miss a lot of appointments.
Yeah, certainly.
And it's gonna make a huge difference if the probation officer understands that.
That's 100%, certainly. At that point where probation officers are involved with individuals who may be on parole or sent out on bail into the community, once the strengths and weaknesses understood, then, the release plan, the management plan, the bail, all those plans that go around the individual can actually be impacted by the FASD knowledge or the awareness of strengths and weaknesses. So it's certainly crucial, because if you get our young people, I'm sure you know this, if you work with them based on their strengths, you see a brand new individual come up. You see somebody new, somebody whom you've never seen before actually develop or come out of them. And this is so important. And it's a bit of a journey, isn't it? That this is the way I see it, which may not necessarily be the correct way. If the individuals, first of all, there's understanding of the vulnerabilities in FASD, there's understanding of what's the condition, the context of it. Of course, then the next stage will be, what are the accommodations that will be needed to support the individual? So it's all intertwined. It's a marriage. You can do is really pitching the message correctly and talking to professionals at that point.
Yeah. As a social worker, I understand that probation officers and parole officers have huge caseloads. It's very easy to, one, fall into cynicism, and to end up with a focus, I just want to make it through the day. But remembering first and foremost that how you interact with someone under your charge can have life or death consequences for them, and can make the difference between someone being able to reach their potential, become a contributing member of society, or get trapped in the cycle of recidivism. Is a lose-lose for everybody.
Exactly.
Not only are they robbed of their potential, but society is robbed of their potential gifts.
That's right. That's true. That's true. That's right. That's right. Certainly, I agree with that. I think it is a massive loss when society doesn't ask these questions, especially within the forensic settings, within professional settings, as you mentioned, in social work, because then, we can't quantify the amount of damage it can do to the individual. Even economically, it is a massive loss, because then you are investing so much money, you don't even understand the situation of the individual, you don't understand their strengths, you don't understand their weaknesses, you don't understand what FASD is all about. Yeah, there's no one winning in that game.
All right, so Gilbert, all these things that we've been discussing, that you've been sharing with us, you're going to be presenting about at a conference next week in Seattle. I know you were there last year.
Yeah, that's right.
I think we talked not long afterward.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. And I know also every other year it's alternating. So on a year like this year and then 2 years from now, it's only for researchers and professionals in the space.
Right.
Is the other years, then people with living experience, parents, littles with FASD, are all
Yeah.
invited. The public are invited to come. So this year,
Mm.
it's all about research. And by the time our conversation airs, it's going to be the Monday following the conference.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm very grateful that you were able to share your work with us today so that all of us who were not invited or not able to attend the
Mm.
conference got to hear what you've been working on. And I think that's tremendously
Thank you.
exciting. Is there anything in particular that you're really looking forward to sitting in on and hearing? Is there anybody that you're like, oh, I can't miss their talk? Is there anything?
Yeah, certainly. Several, unfortunately, the sessions, they are parallel sessions. There are a number of clashes. I was looked at the program. I'm like, oh my God, I want to be here. I want to be here. But then it's all running at the same time. And
I
I've
hate
been
that.
actively just yesterday, funny enough, I was speaking to some colleagues here at the university and I was saying, oh dear, I think there's a technology now that gives you opportunity to spirit yourself into sessions where you are not physically there. But I don't know if it's affordable now, but you wish you can split yourself
Yeah.
into sessions just because they're for um I really love to hear, and this is one of the hallmarks, I believe, of this research. This is the opportunity it has given me to speak to families, to speak to individuals with FASD themselves. I think that's really priceless. I know there's a stigma session, which I'm also looking forward to, because as researchers, we really need that sense of consciousness about, the way we do our research, the way we transmit our messages, the way we actually speak to professionals and the public in general. It's important, I believe, in my opinion, to actually learn non-stigmatizing ways of doing this. And I want to be there. I'm hoping I will be there. I will be there in that session. And also I look forward to just, catching up with a lot of families, and because along the course of the recruitment for this research, I think I've met quite a handful, quite a number. And it'll be good to meet in person and just see their experiences, their feedback, their contribution to shaping the research and that I do. So it's going to be exciting, I believe.
Well, I very much wish that I could be there, but with caring for my mom, I can't travel anywhere until after she passes, but I'll get there one of these years.
Yeah.
I'll get there one
Yeah.
of these years. And since I'm not a researcher, then I would have gladly had a booth and a table to sell my books. That would have made me very happy and just given me
Right.
the opportunity to schmooze with everybody, right?
Yeah.
I would have wanted clones in all those rooms also, because I'm just a lifelong learner.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I mean, there are other amazing speakers, several amazing speakers, researchers doing great stuff.
Yeah,
And of course, the sessions that involve people with living experience of FASD are really brilliant.
yeah,
I certainly love those sessions because then you can certainly hear actively from a living experience point of view what works, what does not work, what helps, what does not help.
right.
And this is what it is all about, I believe.
I've had the privilege of interacting with many people in the research space.
Right.
One of my observations is this. In that first generation of FASD researchers going back 40, 50 years, even 30 years, it
Yeah.
seemed to be very much the quantitative research with the top-down perspective. We're the
Right.
experts. We're going to find
Mm.
things out.
Yeah.
It seems to me that with the current generation of researchers, there's a lot more openness to the qualitative experiences and allowing people's living experience to inform and direct the research. Just as you're saying, that seems to be a big shift.
Yeah,
Would you agree with that? Do you see that also? I mean, certainly you're very open to it, which I just very much appreciate.
yeah, I think it's a shift that should be and must be, if I may say, because, and this is my perspective, this is my philosophy. It's really crucial that we don't do research on people, we don't do research at people, we don't do research on people, we do research with people. This is so crucial in the sense that that living experience element must always and should always form the cornerstone of any research. That is where you can create impact. That is where you can create research designs that are inclusive, that are respectful, that are non-stigmatizing, present a platform for progress in the society. And that's the philosophy I have. So, for instance, for my PhD, I started off with interviewing parents of individuals with FASD. Then I interviewed the individuals themselves with FASD. All of what, the feedback and all the data I collected from these interviews, I took them away and used them into the quantitative approach you were speaking about, to experimentally test this. And what it did for me personally as a researcher was it gave me a real opportunity to triangulate the findings. And I can come back to tell you, oh, the parents said so, the caregiver said so, the young persons with FASD said this, the individuals with FASD reported this. I have gone away and experimentally tested these things with psychological tools, forensic tools, and I can come to tell you that, look, when the caregivers are providing testimonies, pay some more attention when the young people, because it's been experimentally tested, their testimony. So for me, it was an invaluable experience, and it's something I don't want to lose at all along my research career. It's so crucial. And with the fact that everything is dynamic, it changes. You want to ensure that you listen to the community to know that whatever it is we have to do in the coming days, in the coming years, actually sit in, is embedded in the current reality.
Yeah.
And not what you just think should be done or what you think is important,
Yeah.
but what is it that is important to them.
Yeah, and I think we have to give a shout out to the adult leadership collaboration, the FASD Changemakers, whose philosophy is nothing about us without us. And I think they are the ones on an international scale who are bringing that shift about. And we really, as an entire community, researchers and individual alike, we owe that group of young people a debt of gratitude.
Certainly, certainly. I agree with it. It's excellent to see the work the group does. And I particularly remain really grateful to them because at the outset of this current round of research, they devoted their time to speak with me, to consult with me. They offered to look at my documents, look at the research design, look at the plans I have, and give me feedback. And it's
That's
amazing.
awesome.
It's absolutely amazing to see the feedback they gave. I never in my wildest, and this is why I say it's so crucial to carry the living experience along, because the feedback I got, I never thought in those directions at all. In the run up to the research, I thought it was just really mind blowing what I received speaking to them. I think I met with them about 2 to 3 times, if I'm not mistaken, to kind of go through the process. Well, this is the plan, and what do you think about it? What's your feedback? And it's just really good.
Well,
Really
Gilbert,
good.
I'm so grateful for the time that we have spent today. So excited for you to be able to come to Seattle next week and present all these findings. And for all the conversations that you're going to have that I'm not, I'm so jealous. but I'm
Patti, it's all right. It's
I'll be,
okay.
I'll be with you in spirit. But I'm
Yeah,
very grateful for your time. I know it's always challenging when there's such a time difference between us,
yeah.
but I wish you Godspeed and safe travels to
Thank you.
and
Thank you,
from the
Patti.
States. And
Thank you so much.
yeah, all right. Well, thank you again, and I'll have you back again.
Thank you, Patti. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, as always.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Living with FASD Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. Feel free to send comments, questions, and topics you'd like to learn more about, hear more about, to me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. Please remember to like, follow, and share this podcast on whatever platform you use so that more people can find the podcast. Have a blessed week, everyone, and tune in next Monday for another candid conversation on Living with FASD.